So it says here the Biden administration announced Wednesday the strictest restrictions on auto emissions ever in an ambitious and fraught bid to advance the president's climate agenda by forcing U.S. car companies to rapidly accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. To work, this shift would demand a greater mix of electric cars and trucks available to consumers, as companies have almost no choice but to manufacture more no-emissions vehicles to comply with the mandate. That could trigger a battle within the auto industry, which has been working largely in lockstep with the administration as part of an effort to speed the transition to EVs. And they also predict lawsuits to stop this from happening. The story also cheers the Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't reduce inflation and wasn't designed to, because it spent hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies that were made available to lower the cost of electric vehicles. And the quote here from EPA Administrator Michael Regan, that's where this rule is coming from. It's limiting, tailpipe emissions, making them so high that they cannot be achieved by a auto manufacturer unless they just make electric vehicles. Quote, the stakes cannot be higher. We must continue to act with haste and ambition to confront the climate crisis and to leave all our children a healthier and safer world. Basically, Joe Biden has decided that he is going to run the American auto industry from the White House because, through the back door, through regulation, because when you set a regulation this impossible to achieve, it leaves only one alternative, and that would be electric vehicles.
The point, and I think that this is important for people to understand, this kind of regulation, it is impossible to believe that they in the administration, especially in the Energy Department and across all of the regulatory bodies, they are aware that what they are asking for is impossible. They do not care. The point is not that everyone drives an electric car. The point is that you do not drive at all.
Right.
They do not want you leaving your 15-minute city is their new thing right now. They don't want you leaving your home unless you really need to. The lockdowns were something that they were just over the moon about for COVID. Not that I want to get into that and get us kicked off of YouTube, but so they do know that it's not possible. And the point is that it's not possible. It's just like in California, everyone's going to go onto their electric grid. Everything is going to be electrified. The trucks and regular vehicles that people drive as daily drivers are going to be phased out. And California has acknowledged that they know that this will put significant strain on the state and their resources. They do not care. That's just the beginning and end of it. The really insidious part of this is that they will be able to keep saying, well, if you can just make a nice internal combustion engine car that can meet our standards for tailpipe, then it'll be all fine. Why don't, manufacturers just do that?
Yeah.
And people who aren't in the know, the New York Times will uncritically repeat that. BBC will uncritically repeat that. All of the, state media will repeat it. And the average person who still trusts those agencies aren't going to really have the right tools to be able to point the right finger at the right culprit for what's really going on here. And I just find it disgusting. They're not really worried about, emissions and energy use from this kind of thing. This is all about just having a managed economy.
I saw our friend Steve Malloy, who's a board member here at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of junkscience.com. I saw his tweet this morning, and he says he links to actually a great piece in the Wall Street Journal, which I might read a little bit from as well. He says, see if you can spot the problem with Joe Biden's coming EV mandate. 1, EVs require 2.5 times as much copper as conventional cars. 2, the U.S. once had more than a dozen copper smelters, and now it has just 2. And 3, 47% of copper is smelted in China. And I responded, hey, that's no problem at all, Steve. The Biden administration and the eco-left want to end affordable personal transportations. The elites will still have it, of course, but just not ordinary people. Chris, as I mentioned, you wrote a piece in Red State. You were all over this topic. That's why I'm so glad we have you on the pod and we're talking about this today. Why don't you talk about your take on this new rule?
Yeah, well, first, I agree with Linnea's analysis. That really, one of the things that this is about is an attack on the American car and car culture. And American cars and car culture goes, way back to the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, when people started to have the ability to move away from cities, live out in suburbs. They could traverse the country. They could go wherever they want, whenever they want. The gasoline-powered car is the embodiment of American freedom, and electric vehicles are the antithesis of American freedom because they are super expensive. They're about $66,000 on average, whereas the average price of a new gasoline-powered car is mid-20s, so $40,000 more expensive. And they have all sorts of issues that have not been figured out yet, like the range issue. The batteries are still not reliable. They're not dependable. And when the batteries do go out, the batteries cost $40,000 to replace. So once the battery's out, you're done. Unlike a car where, if a part goes wrong, you can take it to your mechanic and they can fix it. So there's all sorts of problems. This is not ready for prime time yet. But once again, I think this is emblematic of our elites on the our bicoastal elites who think this is the way that that the country should be run. People in the flyover country, they don't need to have the ability to drive vast distances. What do they need to go outside of their little town for? So to me, this is just like Linnea said, and Jim, you've made this comment many times as well, that this is about control. And if you can limit people's ability to move around the country, to literally transport themselves, then you definitely have a lot of control over people.
Yeah. I mean, James Taylor, our president, I have to put it on the website actually after this podcast, but we issued a statement and James Taylor called it the Break America's Grid Rule, which I thought was great because look, the idea, again, you have to think, have they thought this through? And because this is madness, this is going to break our grid. You have to come to the conclusion that they're not stupid. They actually know this and they don't care. Or breaking our grid is the point. I mean, putting in policies to make people get into electric vehicles while our electric grid is already strained, that's unscientific. It's insane. And this is while they're shutting down coal and natural gas plants and they're mandating more wind and solar, which is unreliable and doesn't have enough power for a modern society. Oh, and let's not forget, they're also opposed in every case of building more nuclear power plants. So if you were serious about electrification, which is a terrible idea because it's too expensive, natural gas is great. If you have natural gas in your home, stay in it because a lot of states are banning new natural gas hookups these days. So yeah, there's no natural gas ban, guys, but this is happening in states across the country.
Well, another thing, because I read the White House fact sheet, is that they claim that this is going to save Americans $12,000 because it's going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Well, two things on that. First of all, we shouldn't be dependent on foreign oil because last time I checked, a couple of years ago, we were energy independent. We were energy dominant. We were actually a net exporter of oil for the first time since World War II. So that line of reasoning is moot. It's null and void. And then second of all, they claim that this will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it won't because the grid is going to be needed to charge these cars. And last time I checked, the grid, as much as they wish it were, mostly dependent on wind and solar, it's not. And it's never going to be because there is just not enough wind and solar to power the grid for us to live like we have been living in the 21st century. So on all the ways that they're trying to justify this, it falls flat. So it just makes me wonder, what is their real agenda here? And I think their real agenda is control, control, control.
Yeah, I mean, we had our energy grid can barely handle the gradual shutting down of reliable energy across the country as it is. I mean, Texas, obviously, almost the entire state of Texas was in blackout because they were too dependent on wind. This is like, Linnea, our energy system can't handle it. I mean, if they really want 67% of all new cars sold in 9 years are going to be electric plug-ins, if that was even possible, if it was even going to happen, if you were to replace all of these regular gas-powered cars, I just want to call them cars. EVs should be called something else because people keep thinking that they're the same thing and they're not. But if we actually did that, if we went to 67% of all new cars were electric, our grid would collapse. It would collapse long before we ever got to that 67% number.
Well, yeah, and that's assuming that we actually have the materials necessary to build that many EVs in the first place.
Yep.
I think that the United States, on a per capita basis, owns more cars than any other country on the planet. I don't think that would be a huge. I haven't actually looked into that, but I don't think that would be a big stretch to estimate. And as you were saying earlier, and with Chris's article, that kind of transportation freedom, especially in a continent as large as the United States, and in a country where so many people are able to live extremely remote, okay, and a lot of people do. I live not extreme. I wouldn't call it extremely remote, but I live on an island. So when my, when the electricity goes out or if a bridge goes out, there's no getting out of here. So that kind of sucks. But just imagine living in one of the more distant parts of Manhattan and having an emergency like a hurricane coming. Mm-hmm. And everyone's in EVs. When I lived in South Louisiana, they shut the electricity down in advance of a hurricane making landfall because they didn't want power lines dangling in the water.
Right.
This is all electric is death. That's it. And these sadistic freaks in California are working on banning things like independently owned diesel generators. They are not happy with you being able to provide for yourself. You can put solar on your roof, but that's not going to work in a snowstorm, and they know it. We had an email from a viewer a couple of weeks ago who said that where they live in the Sierra Nevadas, their local commission, or the California State Air Quality Commission, is asking them to ban natural gas heaters in their homes up in the Sierras. What does that mean for someone who gets snowed in when the electricity goes out? They know full well that the grid cannot handle this stuff. And not only that, but they're trying to get rid of the way that you can get around the electric grid going down. It is insane to me. It's really hard, as someone who wants to think the best of people, to wrap my mind around the idea that they can fully know the impacts of these policies and go ahead with them anyway.
Yeah. I lived in California. I moved out of California in 2010, escaped, I should say, when they still had U-Hauls to be had. But back then they started banning you couldn't put wood stoves or fireplaces in any new construction. So imagine you're in, like I said, record snowfall. People were snowed in. I have a friend who lives in the mountains in Southern California. And he would send me pictures that you couldn't believe how big the snow was. It was like the Donner Pass or something. If you don't have a wood stove and electricity goes out for days, you die. That's it. You're basically putting on snowshoes and fighting for your life.
Well, Jim, but another thing they've done in California is they've said that they're going to outlaw the sale of new gasoline-powered cars in the not too distant future. So I think this is the federal government and these crazy left-wing states getting together, colluding, and saying, what do we want? We want people not to buy gasoline-powered cars because we think they're bad for the environment. Even though I don't really think they think that, and we just once again want to keep people as restricted as possible. So this is the way to do that. And I think that this is, just the beginning of the calls for the end of the gasoline powered car. And I'll tell you one thing, I'm going to fight tooth and nail because I will not buy an electric car just because the government says you have to buy an electric car. I'm not going to do it.
Well, I guess our used cars will go up in value if there's any silver lining to this very, very dark cloud. And I think it's important to think about the mining that is involved in creating an electric vehicle. It's one of the reasons why it's so expensive. I think we should start calling them slave vehicles because these are without slave labor, child labor in the Congo, in Africa, without slave labor in China. These cars cannot be made. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal in this morning's paper, but it was posted last night. Net zero will mean a mining boom. And it mentions, Chris, that California made a stunning decision last year that by 2035, all new cars sold in the state must have at least 2.5 times as much copper as conventional cars do today. That's not literally what the mandate said, of course, but it's a practical effect. Again, Linnea, that people don't think about these things, or at least the policymakers don't seem to think about these things. But it's the practical effect of ordering all cars to be electric in the next 10 years. The drive toward energy transition will increase demand for lithium, cobalt, and other minerals many times over. And an offshore wind project uses 9 times the minerals of a natural gas-fired power plant generating the same capacity. It mentions here that just doing copper, let's forget about lithium and the other stuff. And this is what Steve Malloy mentioned in his tweet. World copper production is highly concentrated geographically, more so than oil production. 3 countries, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, produce 40% of the world's crude oil supplies. Just 2 countries mine about 40% of the world's copper. Peru, where the government is in disarray, and Chile, whose government is struggling between its populist agenda and the need for economic growth. And the point that this author is making, Daniel Jurgen, is that when you need the copper and you need the lithium and you need the cobalt from unstable places, it's a huge problem, which means these cars actually we don't have the mining capacity to make these cars, to get the minerals for these cars anyway. He says that developing a major new mine takes 15 to 20 years or more to even come online. So even if we were able to find the minerals that we need, our ability to get it out of the ground at the scale that our government bureaucrats are demanding we meet, it's not possible, Linnea. Even if we could find it, actually, I think there's not even enough cobalt and lithium and copper in the world to convert all of our gasoline-powered cars into electric vehicles. But just if we were to start right now, a moonshot for getting more minerals out of the ground, it would still take more than a decade and maybe 2.
Well, I mean, the government could always loosen up on some mining regulations. How likely do you think they're going to be on doing that? Let's be clear that it's known reserves. So with known reserves of lithium and some other materials, we do not have enough to give every person in the UK an electric car. So I would love to know how that would work here. But like I said, the point is not to have everyone drive an electric car. The point is to have most people not drive at all. I have read on engineering forums, there has been a shift in the way that these, even civil engineers and people who are working in various energy production industries, including nuclear, that they don't think that the renewables and their inability to generate enough electricity is the problem. They think that how much electricity we need is the problem. They intend to decline our demand for electricity, not to match what we need now.
The point is not to really get everybody to convert to electric cars. The point is to get people out of their cars for good, forever.
I agree, and also they're doing it through force because the market, there is no demand for it. I saw one of the latest polls. Less than 25% of Americans want to buy an EV for their next car. Less than 6% of all new vehicle sales last year were EV cars. Less than 1% of the 250 million cars that are on the road in the United States are electric. If there was an organic desire and demand for electric, the car companies would be making them because they would be making money off them. The Inflation Reduction Act, like you said, Jim, had in it a whole bunch of subsidies to try to help and force people to buy these. Of course, that actually helps rich people by, giving them subsidies because they're the ones who are buying these. And then what does the auto companies do? They jack up the prices, which is exactly what we saw as soon as the subsidy was announced. And you know what? The car companies are still not making money on these cars. GM and Ford are losing billions of dollars because people don't want to buy these cars.
How dare you?
So what is the response? Force them to.